Hmm. All right. Hmm. Hello. Can people hear me? I think I'm streaming. Says I'm streaming. I'm still in an ad. I'm getting an output on my mic. Can anyone tell me if you can hear me? Hello, is everyone? Can anyone hear me? Because it shows I'm getting sound. Am I getting sound? I'm not seeing anything in the chat room. Did that do anything? Is there something over one of my windows here? This is why we start early. I have... Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Sorry, I had to slide my window. There was nothing showing up there. Hi, Kyle. Hi, everyone. Yeah, the whole streaming thing. I'm still working on it, man. All right. We're a little early still. Yeah. How is everyone doing this evening? Hello, Waltron, Mercury, Balance. All right. So I was watching a documentary on Nietzsche earlier, and I saw some really lovely architectural things. So we're gonna make a drop earring based on an architectural element, and then that way I can show you some fast block up, how to use reference images and the such. Mm-hmm. All right, are we getting close? Yeah, we're almost there. All right. Okay. All right. I guess we have 5 minutes still. Kyle, should I wait until it's actually proper time? Starting early, is that a bad thing? Okay. Picture. So, how do I get this thing to zoom? No. You know, picture viewer is not the best thing in the world here. All right, I think we're real close. So, as I said, I was watching a documentary earlier and I saw some really wonderful architecture. And I really wanted to kind of show you how to, oops, that wasn't it. Show you how to take something from a reference image and then, yeah, it's awesome. So what I do, I use a program called Mischief, and we'll just slide this down to 0 transparency. And so we're going to take a really quick reference and not necessarily copy it, but use it as a reference and see what we come up with here. So let's go to something we can see through. And we'll just say, okay, we like this. We like this little guy. We want a return, so what do we have here? Let's bring this up. Something in there like that. And then we'll do a double there. There we go. We'll use that. We'll reinforce the arrow. These will come back in. We'll follow those. And that'll be the beginning of our drop. Let's see if we can squeeze another crossover in here. Are you having a problem with, I think, are we having issues? Are we not coming up? Anyone? I can see myself streaming. Okay. So now we'll determine sort of crossovers. So we'll do a quick change of color here. This will be our foundation. And then we'll just switch colors and we'll say, hey, this will cross over in front there and cross over in front there. These will do that. And we'll see if we do that. Okay. So that's pretty close to our base inspiration. Now we'll come over here and turn this all the way up so we can't see through it. And really that's about all the decisions we're going to make in here, I think. We can say this comes around, under, up, and then so that's kind of over, under, under, over. There we go. So, and let's rotate this around so it's sort of up and down. And so that's sort of a foundational basis for our block up. And so that way we've taken an architectural element and very quickly turned it into something that we can use as a foundational block up. Now this exports out as OBJs and STLs, but I'm just going to show you a quickie thing here in ZBrush. We could do the same thing, see through, and we can then, if let's say you're having import issues or something like that, you can literally just hide your screen a little, see the see-through, and then when you come over to menus, it comes back out when you get back here. See, so you can pick your brushes and the such. So now, we're going to go W. We'll turn this into a cube. Scale could be an issue here. Let's zoom out. And then we'll just make this. And we're only going to do one side for right now. Let me get see-through so we can analyze our square a little here. I just want this to be, well, we could go ahead and make it 2 and do both sides at the same time if we really wanted to. Polycube. Get this. Okay, so that's only one block, so that's fine. And so now we'll zoom that out. Let's get our see-through back on. Get this roughly to where we want it for our center. Right. Tilt it up so we can see it a little. And now we'll go to ZModeler. And we're just going to drag this all the way down. And then we're going to get rid of this. All right, so that's pretty close. And let us then start inserting some geometry here. Go here, insert. Let me have that on. Insert single edge because we want to be able to slide it around. So we're going to have a line there, probably a line there. These are going to start in here. We'll start that in there. We got another there and another there. All right. So now we have a rough line for our block up. We're going to tilt this out a little so we can get to it. We're just going to Q mesh this out. And I tend to like to just generate some geometry and then attack it sort of as I use the move points infinite XYZ. And then I can come in and just drag these around and get us some simple base geometry. Excuse me. And as you can see, I'm not being super persnickety because this is only a form reference. I wasn't going to be super exacting about it. So let's get our base shape in. And you can see I sort of chose that pink back there as my base arrow form. And we're just going to kind of slide it around here until we get it where we want it. And we'll prepare that to link up to it. Stoop, stoop. Right. And let's just, I'm not going to join that. We'll get it a little bit closer. There we go. Now we can come back out, get it roughly back to where we want it. Because like I said, this is just going to be a base shape reference, so I'm not being too worried about what's happening here as far as exactitudes. Okay, so that's our sort of base shape. And then we will do this. Let's say this will come off of this. So we're going to insert a line here. We're going to drag these out, pull this up, and now that becomes the foundation for the next geometry. Now I find just doing an easy flipped extrude, you can pull this out and it does not connect to the layer below it, right? And we're just going to pull this out to here. And now you can see we got a little out of scale, but once again, I'm not too stressed about that. And we'll just drag this and pull this out over here. And now let's go back to QMesh and just pop a few of these out. And that is going to come around and just sort of, let's fill this guy up. So we don't move that underneath, so that becomes that part. And that's going to fade down into that, so I'm not stressing about that. And then we're going to pull one of these guys out. And see how, let's go back from see-through. And I know that you can adjust the snapping and stuff, but I find it just so much easier if you go extrude, pull. There's no wanting to hop to the other side. So get that sort of in there, and we'll just pull a few of these out. Stop that. Yeah, this is ZModeler. And then we'll slide this back to see-through. And so we know that it's coming out right around this square, so I'm just going to go back from see-through, come to the bottom side here, and just sort of pull this out over here because this is where we want to wind up. And then I'll just start sliding these around to kind of get rough geometry where I want it. At this point, I'm not worrying about the over and under because we'll deal with that in a bit. We're just trying to get our base geometries in place. All right, so there we go. This will all kind of come down. Slide. We'll start with that later. And there, that's getting to the top. Let's come back to see-through. Boop. So now we have roughly those two shapes. And now this one, we want to come off the center, but let's go ahead and insert. Oops, sorry. Insert. Boom. And we want to, oh, we have the masking on. We don't want that on. Insert, we want it to be a little more than half. All right. Nope. Wrong place. We need to insert here. Sorry, guys. Insert a little higher than half. And once again, flip it over, bring it down, see through. And yes, of course, you can just attach this as an image behind, but sometimes you have something there, you don't want to import it. This is just a really quick, different way of getting this geometry in. So we're roughly here, right? Yeah. And now, like I said, if we just use QMesh, see are we on QMesh? Oh no, we're in extrude, so there we go. And now just grab two, let's come down here. Ooh. I get a little quickie on those brushes sometimes, so we have this here. We know that it's coming out down here a little, so we're just going to grab a corner, pull it out, grab a corner, pull it out. We'll drag it down like that. See through back on, just to get our proportions right. Or close, I'm not too. All right, and now let's extrude this. Well, that'll give us our little dip. All right, and so that's the basics. And now let's just pull this out a couple more times. And we'll, boom, see through, and it's gone. So now we're just going to bring this up and make a ball end here. Get these tiny over. All right, so that's fairly close to our base block up, right? And then we're going to continue to work on this in a half for right now. So let's grab move topological. I'll have to click to turn those dynamics off still. And let's just grab these and kind of just tug this up. Push that down, tug this up. And this will come down, under, and around. Oops. For some reason it's tagging everybody, but that's okay. There we go. And then this is going to come up and over and kind of be a swirl on this side. Right. So now we have this, since we did that double side, we have this double thickness here. Let's get rid of some of these. ZModeler. Go back to QMesh and just punch that out. We'll grab, is it going to let me grab that? There it is. We'll punch that out. And then we'll come over here and punch this out. Oop, come on. There we go. And then that'll be a transition area. So we roughly have a quick block up. And you can see I try not to spend a lot of time at block up. Unless there's a good reason. Sometimes, if it's logos or things like that where things really need to good morning, good afternoon. Well, there we go. And now we'll insert here just to kind of get geometry level, or geometry fairly. Before I start dividing, I want my geometry to be fairly even. And so we'll come in here. We're probably going to switch into dynameshing pretty quick with this one, but all right, so we have that. Okay, so we have our rough arrow shape for those who came in. We're kind of taking this as an inspiration, and I sort of played with some of this. I think we might actually use a return here that I don't have yet, but there we go. So now we're here. Here, come on. All right. Alrighty, let's throw an insert down the center of this just so we're pseudo close. All right, so now I gotta start dividing. Boom, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So now we have a little bit more geometry, but we still are low enough that we can use move topological. Sorry. We can still use move topological without it choking out too hard. As you can see, it's all pretty good. We're going to, let's grab move elastic, and let's give this a nice curve form. And this is going to allow it to hang nicely because we're going to make a dangle earring out of it. Some contrapposto is always nice. Don't particularly like it in that direction, so let's see what it looks like back here. All right. Normally, you want your little points to point forward so someone doesn't get their throat cut while they're trying to, when you're trying to when you're wearing things, you don't necessarily want points pointed towards the body, obviously, because that is problematic in many ways. So I actually think that this should come from above here. So we have a nice crossover. We're going to fill some of this in. I want this to come down. Once again, so we have these crossovers and stuff are creating dynamic surface transitions. And, that's what we want. That's the beauty of this program, is it allows us to do wonderful things like sculpt as opposed to CADing. So we'll get that down. So let's pull this up. Let's get this really down, and maybe that'll give us room for a little transitional crossover here. And thin stuff out, thicken it up. Yeah, I think we can do it. Let's get this down here. Let's hide this right now. And let's move this up and over that part. We'll get this coming down and under. There we go. That gives us something interesting going on here. And that starts our curve, right? So now we have this nice contrapposto form. We'll get this going out, and that's going to come up and around. And I tell my students a lot, and when I talk, I always talk about it, and it's staying loose in your block up gives you, once again, you don't necessarily have, it gives you the freedom to change your expectations of your part and say, oh, well, this would be much more dynamic if it were going over and under as opposed to just under. And so don't be afraid to move stuff around at this point and experiment, because you can always go back. That's what we have undo for. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. And that is just under. I'd like a transition there, but I'm just not seeing it happening. So let's show part. Look at what we have here. Yep, let us go ahead and do this. Smooth topological is still selected. Let's get this down. Let's pull that up a little more. Push this down. All right, so now that gives us that. And you can smooth and thicken and inflate and de-inflate and the whole shebang. So we have everything going on. Let's kick this around a bit. All right. Okay, so we have a little bit of activity going on. Let's get these curves kind of to be a little bit more appealing. Let's pull this down. Let's pull that up and back. Okay, so want a little more room here. Stretch the point down a bit. And now we're going to see how far we are. We've moved things around while we were futzing. I still think we're missing something down here in the point, but we'll get around to that in a bit. All right, so yeah, I think that's far enough for where we're going. All right, so at this point, Dynamesh is always relative to the size of the environment or the size of the part within the environment. So you never know when you Dynamesh. A quick check on what size we're dealing with here. Update size ratio. So 76 by 251 by 29 mil. So this is huge for an earring. So we're going to grab W, center. We're going to just drag this down. Update size ratio, 11 mil by 38 by 4. That's a little bit more realistic. I think we're going to even go down a touch more. Update size ratio. Okay, so that means we're going to wind up with something that's, yeah. All right, we'll stay there for now. All right, so you can always keep working in the half, but I prefer to see what's actually going on in the part. So I don't really like working in halves for too long. Let's see what's happening here. This isn't the best side silhouette, so we're going to move it around a little bit more before we Dynamesh and move on. So let's continue that up and let's pull all this back. And it's a little bit sleeker form. And this is all probably going to come in a little more here. This will come down. Okay, so if I want to Dynamesh right now, or Z-remesh would be the obvious choice because we don't want these to join. So let us Z-remesh this thing. What are we at? 63. Let's just say half. Boop. Now this will get us down, and we are still going to have to Dynamesh this together because I want to work in the double. I want to get rid of some of the load. Well, I'm remeshing before I'm Dynameshing. Not that it matters too much, but I want to have a master part here that has these separations in it just in case we lose things. So now I'll come here, I'll duplicate this, and then I'll come in here, and I'm going to smooth some, no, let's hide that. Oops, there we go. I'm going to smooth some airspace into this real quick. So these aren't touching. And that way, when I Dynamesh this, these shouldn't join, as long as we Dynamesh with enough geometry here. So it's kind of thinning things that that's touching. I could come in and just move some of these out as well, but I find this is just as quick a way of getting around it. And here, let's go ahead and just fill some of this up. And I'm probably going to want this. Let me get a snake hook. Oh, dynamic. Front. Since this is a fat shape, let's drag that over and give this just a little bit more airspace. And that way we can kind of have a double line coming here. Move topological. Let's just drag a little bit more airspace into this. A little bit more here. 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 Because I'll probably break these out into poly groups in a bit so we can move them around. All right, so let's see what Dynamesh does at 128. 900,000. It's a little high for what I like to start with, but that's okay. We'll do that. Subtool master. Oh, this may or may not work. Here, let's just do this. Duplicate. I don't know where this is on center line, so it's just easier to duplicate. We'll take this one, deformation, mirror. Yeah, see what I mean if we had room, but just in case. W. Drag this over and kind of get it to where we want it. A little more room there. Okay. Merge down and Dynamesh. So now drop that. Now we have our rough beginnings of our part. And so you can see you can get to a pretty ornate block up fairly quickly. What was that? Well, yeah, yeah, I think yes, I do, because I have to have I haven't. This is my first experience in broadcasting, so I will try to start broadcasting more. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna inflate some of this up. And once again, I'm trying to inflate away from the layer below it, because I still want some airspace in these for now. And then we'll start doing some shaping. And kind of get this sort of up and at 'em here. All right, so Here, let's get this guy a little puffier so he has something to carve on. And yeah, you can do this with Z-spheres and things like that. It's just, I tend to just like my block up with the Z modeler, because at the end of the day, you really can control your geometry. Do I not have symmetry turned on? Okay, well, there we go. Is it low enough? Here, let's lower. Oh, that got quite a bit bigger. Here, let's drop this some. Redynamesh. 614 might be small enough to do it without too much drama. You can always come down here. And this works half the time. Sometimes it just gets squirrely. It's a, yeah. You know. And then, okay. Hopefully I didn't just doom us. Sometimes, yeah, see, zero symmetry found on X symmetry. I don't have answers for that one, guys. So here, we'll just come back in and retouch things up. If worse comes to worse, we'll just split it in half and yeah, let's just do that. Just so we're not sitting here futzing around for, trim, SK, trim rectangle. Right, done. I think I worked more on that side, didn't I? Yep. And we'll just, now actually this should work because we centered it, didn't we? No, we didn't. I'm a ding dong. Okay, duplicate. Mirror. And it's way over here, yeah. W, center. Where'd you go? W? Oh, well, there we go. Turn symmetry off, center, alt, flip that, drag this over. All right. Merge down. Okay. Dynamesh. And that should be 600, so yeah, that's fine. Drop, oh no, that's not what we wanted to do. W, center, turn X off, center, go to home, frame. Now we know we're on axis at least. Okay. Draw. And now, oh, there it was going again. Right into the same thing I did last time. Ay. All right. So we're just gonna get some of this out. Now let's break these into polygroups. Go W, let's go to Y, mask, and why are you going over there? You're supposed to be coming this way. Sometimes this doesn't work easily. It's always a mystery to get these things to. Am I not on that limb? Oh, he's already joined. All right, fine, whatever. We'll just sculpt. Let us kind of get these into the position we want them. Kind of get some form. Look at this. We'll pull this out. All right. Okay, so sorry, let me get some water. Okay, so I'm not gonna worry too much about this because these are forms that sculpt pretty easy. And now I'm just going to fill in and re-dynamesh when I start destroying my mesh a little more than I want. And now I'm going to block in my volumes. That last dynamesh I didn't check, or the last time we dynameshed I didn't check, because when we were up in the 1 billions it kept the stuff separate. When we dropped down to 600,000s, everybody joined. I don't want to go back and debate the world of dynamesh, so we will just start sculpting here. And now I'm just starting to get my volumes in sort of where I want them. I'm not really worried about my surfaces yet. And my students know I always say I tend to go to high geometry very quickly, but that's when I've blocked up a little bit more exacting than we did today. So here, I'm not going to bother going up into high res until I have my volume sorted out. And so we're going to just get in here. And I always just sort of go big and then smooth it back to normal, go big, smooth it back to normal. And see, I'm missing something here. Let's mask that off. Let's get snake hook and just look at some options here. We liked our little arrowhead, but I think I want a return here of some sort. Sure. Redynamesh. And this is why a lot of the creature and character guys start, and gals, I'm not being, start in low geometry because they're pushing a lot of the stuff around. I'll still argue that for the most part, once you get your volume sorted out, you really do want to jump into much higher geometry, because as you're sculpting, you're making some pretty important decisions about how the light will react with the surfaces of your object. And since in jewelry, and well, in pretty much any small object that you're printing, well, any large object, any sculptural object in the real world, you're actually sculpting in light. You're dealing with how light reflects off your object and the story that tells. So we'll get there pretty quick. So this will come behind that, let's say. That'll go in front. I do think it is mandatory that you make noises and while you sculpt. Otherwise, you take yourself far too seriously, and we can't have any of that, can we? All right. And now I'm just trying to work out some silhouettes I like right now. Just very careful. Your broke his. Oh, thank you. I think that it's something that I will start doing more often. I'm going to Spain in November, and I'll be able to set up and really sort of take the time and energy. Right now I have quite a bit of freelance work I'm in the middle of, and I've been back and forth a lot. So I'm a little hectic right now. All right. And just fill that in so we're getting some curves. And that's not bad. Let's get more here. Make these a little more blendy. We'll inflate this whole thing a little. It's a little thin. All right. From the front. Now that I connected that, I'd probably want that to go behind. Yeah, we'll make it work. Okay. Here, we'll just change this line a little. And that'll make this bell shape that we're getting to here a little bit more important as opposed to the curve of these. And now that allows this to take a little bit more precedence. And it's okay if that sits in front now. Yeah, not bad. Okay. So let's get this a little bit bigger. All right. Okay. I think we might be ready to start dividing up and making some actual design decisions. All right, so now we're at 700,000. Let's get up. Divide. I would argue that 700,000 is actually a little. If I knew that I was going to be doing a lot of very ornate surface details, or let's say snake scales, or something like that, where I knew that I would need to move the model around and still retain a bunch of surface detail, I would probably let's go ahead and duplicate it. Because this is a good time because we don't have a lot of detail. Now, as low as I want to go, this might join. So let's pull this out just a touch. Let's see how we're going to be. Just find an angle and mask most of that off. All right, get that. And now we can move that back and away without it becoming a problem. So I still want the freedom to move those around because I don't know exactly where they're going to sit. I may want some airspace here. So, you know, pulling this up and getting these out of the way will be helpful. So we'll leave those. And now, like I said, if I knew that, because 700,000 is not a really good base level as far as the ability to move and change detail. Now I'll actually show you what I mean by that. So we'll just knock this down. Let's go to 20 and see what it does. $66, that'll give us what, like 6 subdivision levels? 1, 2, 3, no, 4. That's not so good. So let's even go, let's back up, go down to 10 or 8 as it may be. Oh, okay, did that join? Nope, that's good. All right, so now that gives us at least one more subdivision. 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then we can jump up to the 19 if we need the high detail. Okay, so here we go. I have my block up. I have some basic concepts of mass and where I want it to be. And I now go all the way up to, I usually start sculpting in that 3 to 7 million or 4 to 8 million poly range, because as I'm sculpting, and this I'll always do with clay tubes, because it gives me edges, right? And you can see is as I sculpt up at this level, I'm actually leaving edge detail, right? You can see right here, my brush is leaving nice edges, and I can start to decide where I'm looking for light. Now, a lot of people are like, okay, well, I'll come in here and I try to, because this is one of the hard things to get across to my students, and it's a concept you kind of have to wrap your head around. And you may know it, but until you get used to the practice of it, I think it's still a little elusive. And so I'm doing all of this, and it is nigh impossible to get smooth surfaces at this level. You're sitting here and you're futzing with it, and then you come back with SK trim, and oh, you have this little bump here, and you keep trying to get it out. It's a nightmare. But that's why we have the lower reses. You just drop down a few, hit smooth, come back up, and you're still retaining some of your detail, and you're smoothing a lot of the superficial noise out. So hopping back and forth between levels is how you retain your smoothness or your surface smoothness and consistency. But I still would prefer to be up here. So as I'm sculpting, like I said, I'll find turn symmetry on, ding dong. Boop. And as I'm up here, and I'm blocking in, and I'm making decisions on where I want some convexes and concaves, and I'm like, okay, well, I want this to travel in front of this. And now I can start to make some pretty subtle aesthetic decisions that are going to because see, what's nice here is I can smooth with smooth stronger, and you're going to get some motion. But right now I'm not trying to get all my surfaces right. I'm just trying to get the architecture and the forms in place, so I know where my light's reflecting. And so you can see I'm coming in here, and that little lump's funny. So do we try to bring it down, or do we accent it by making it big? And that's okay. Let's keep it dramatic. Right. And so I'm making some fairly subtle decisions about where my detail is going here. And then I don't need to resculpt it, because if we're doing this at a much lower level in a real rough block up, you'll come in and let's say you have a really nice area. As you go up in geometry, those things get soft. So I find it easier to decide on some of these aesthetic choices at the higher resolution, and then doing my cleanup and such at the lower resolution, and I'm not having to redevelop the higher detail or the more sophisticated decisions, and then having to divide it up to get the subtlety of the surfaces. So, all right, so we will come in. Are you going to Dynamesh again now? No, not at this point. I mean, if I decide that I need, let's say, I need to connect here to here or something, then yeah, I'll re-Dynamesh. But at this point, once I've done my dividing up, I probably won't Dynamesh unless I need to, or unless I find someplace that I need a dramatic change, or let's say I use twist or something that's really sort of destructive to the meshes, then I'll re-Dynamesh. But no, the plan is not at this point to re-Dynamesh. And you can see we're just coming in and finding our surfaces, finding some of our detail. Right. This is returning pretty heavy here. So let's get that. And see, under normal circumstances, when I block this up, I would have blocked this up in different polygroups, so I could come in and do this. But honestly, we can do it right here, right now. This is an over group. All right, we'll just come in, mask this off. And you'll see me polygroup and then clear all polygroups and polygroup and clear all polygroups, because completely depending on where I need to work, I'll assign polygroups so I can get rid of certain areas. So we Control W and I'll tap this, and now that should go away. Boom. Right. And so now we can sort of get a more realistic impression of where the surfaces are lining up on one another. All right, we'll get that up. And so now we can make this appear as if it's, you know, a consistent line. Now you can see the mesh in here is a little squirrely, right? Because of how that dynameshed. It's not quite on the grid, and when I smooth, like I'm getting a little bit of, see those stretching lines? Even at 6 million, we're getting this. So at some point, I probably will redynamesh just so I can come in here and get those lumps out. But at this point, we're going to wind up with more areas like that, so I'm not too stressed about the dynamesh at this point. And here, what's nice is you can just continue the stroke. I'm not pausing there. And you can get lines that appear to go under. And let's just give this a little weight. And come in. And you can see I'm not real precious with anything I put out. This process is really about finding those forms. At some point, we'll do something that is, I'll ask if I can show working on some of the things that I'm doing right now. And that is completely representational. It's very rigid. And so you can, obviously use reference and stick to it for like logos and such. But let's face it, who wants to do that? All right, now let's come to the back. Got a lump here. Let's fill it in here. Still got a little lump there, don't we? Let's get rid of that. I think I now see why some of the other ZBrushers use music as they're doing this, so I don't have to necessarily talk 100% of the time, and you don't have to listen to me hum. All right. Yeah. So there. You'll notice that I do a lot of the sort of cross-hatching with clay tubes because I use it sort of like a rake tool where I can see where my surfaces are. It gives me a pretty nice interpretation of what's going on with that surface because it acts as a layer tool almost, so I can lay it in one layer at a time, and you can see you start to get an idea of where your surface is actually lying. All right. Every once in a while I'll come in with SK trim, or I also use H polish. You can see how that actually scoops a little more though. See how it's being aggressive towards the center? That's the one thing I like about the SK trim, is that it's really edge heavy, so it allows you to see how it's not destroying or rolling over that edge. It allows you to really come in and tune sharp edges without using pinch, so it's not destructive, right? It's not loading here, right? See how we're getting a nice crease, and it's really holding that crease too, but it's not loading the geometry like pinch does, right? See how pinch loads the edge? Well, the SK trim polish oops, let's touch that harder. That SK trim polish really, I don't know enough about the brush to tell you what it's doing exactly, but it's pretty rad because it lets you hold sharp edges and still not load that edge with geometry. And especially in this stuff, you know, you want your geometry to stay pretty equal because you never know where you're going to decide to put, well, unless you do sketches. You know, you never know where you're going to wind up wanting to put your geometry at this point. So it's a good thing. All right, there we go. So now we've kind of decided on that. Let's get something going on here. And, you know, it's, once again, it's an easy decision to, like, you know, on edges, make things sharp. But once again, you're wearing this around your neck. You know, your ears tend to point towards your neck. So if you have something that doesn't have a motion on it, the holes are never pierced going totally with you this way. So they're going to go like this and they'll wind up stabbing you in the neck. So it's a good decision not to put really sharp points on the ends of earrings, which I am doing right now exactly on other pieces. You know, think comfort. You don't want to harm people. You want people to buy a second round of your stuff. So let's not make sharp points. Now you can create a visual, you can create something that visually looks like a sharp point, right? You know, I mean, that can look pretty aggressive, but, you know, you're not going to hurt anyone with it. And make a scoop. There we go. That gives us a little depth here, a little change of layer. Get that. No, that's the wrong one. H. That'll knock that down. The other thing is a lot of these polishes will often grab edges. I keep trim dynamic around because trim dynamic is really one of the best ways to, here, let's pinch this. Pinch. Trim dynamic is one of the best ways. It does not really pay attention to sharp edges, so you can just come in, if you just stroke across it, you can knock hard edges down without getting some of that weird, you know, that happens as you try to cross over edges in this program here. So all right, we'll make that a graphic edge, sort of reinforcing our movement. These will come in here. All right, that's a good start, I think. Clean that up a bit. And we're going to hide some more. Get rid of this. Got everything. Nope. Do not have backface masking on that. Nope. I tend to keep backface masking on for my masking because that way it cuts down on some of the bleed over issues when you're masking. If you'll notice, I also keep a pretty sharp mask brush. I have my fall off set at 100. And here, we'll flip that hide part. And now let's make some decisions on the center of this piece. Okay, I want this to be straight. I'm going to use trim front. I want it to be a little more architectural than, see how we have this wave in here. So the easiest way, trim front, hit it, come up and around. And there we go, now we have a sharp edge there. Now, let's see what's happening back here. Okay, so we're going to continue that up. Let's just go ahead and continue it up to here. Let's go undo, get us back to here. Trim front now. Boop. All right. And so now we have a consistent thickness. Show part. Right. And the rest of that is originating someplace else. That'll cross over. I'm not too worried about that. And see, this is where people get a little weirded out when they're working in higher resolution. They're like, oh, look, I'm smoothing this, and I just can't. Yeah, just don't stress it. Just knock it down. Tap it. It's gone. Higher res. Tap it. Higher res. Tap it. And now you can see that you don't have that edge there anymore. So it's just easy to, it's easier. There is no difficulty in smoothing if you get yourself into trouble, but it allows you to not blast everything away while you're smoothing otherwise. So once again, why I tend to keep it there. Okay, so that's our back. Did I do this backwards? Nope. That's our front. All right. So now let us just come right here and just get inside that, get inside that. Boop. Nope. Hide part. Okay, so let's run a solid down the center and see what that looks like. And here, since this is all wonky, we can come in here. And with move, we'll just sort of tap this into a nice clean curve. All right. SK trim. You can see how the SK trim polish really wants to keep nice even surfaces. So it's a good way to find surfaces. And here we're gonna thin this out. Go over a little more. Over a little more. All right. And now just come in and knock this back a little. Yes, that is the ideal earring, is to harm people horribly. You always have to provide a wear at your own risk sticker if that is your agenda, though, because lawsuits are horrible. And we do live in litigious societies, unfortunately. All right. And let us come here, hold down shift. Right. And then these were something like that. Alright, so kind of like that. Let's go slash. It's at a pretty legitimate rate. Let's get it smaller. And just run a slash up the center, give us some depth there. Okay, that's good. Let's make that a little less soft. Show part. Alright, fine. Now, we'll decide on what's going on here. And you can see as we start stretching these meshes out, we may need and or want to remesh again here, or redynamesh again at some point before we start putting in fine detail. Because this is an easy level of detail to reproject up to. So we'll probably do another we'll do another Dynamesh to reset our meshes nice. Because we're getting a little distortion in some of these places. And when it comes down to it, the distortion is not your friend. Mesh integrity, it's always a fight just to keep your mesh integrity. You can see it's just, I'm always looking for that surface, you know. And that's, like I said before, it's why I go back and forth and use this almost like a rake positioning tool so I can see where my surfaces lie. It also allows me to control the transition between convex and concave. Like, you know, I could come in here, pull, and then go negative. And just a couple taps. And now you have some interesting plane transitions. Because once again, right now we're just seeking for, we're just looking for those surfaces right now, trying to get everything in an interesting place. Here, let's do this. We'll make that surface. So there's a return to both layers of that. Alright, so now we have some lumps in this thing, but that's easily dealt with. Alright, and which one's going? Okay, that one's going over that one. Right? Over, under. Yep. Over. Under. If you're doing something you're pulling out, just mask it. I'm gonna mask this whole thing because I want these to come back. Let's get, I want to see I want to see this point up in here. So we're going to pull this up in a second. So I want to readjust this line that gives that room enough to pull up. So this is going to come down here. So as you can see, we're now doing destructive things to this mesh, which means we will need to remesh or redynamesh here in a minute. Looking it up, flip that, and we are going to pull this up just a bit. Oh. And just so we get that little negative space return there. And that lightens this part up dramatically. Because see, we have airspace back there. Now let's drop back here and see how that becomes. This is just a solid mass in here, but if we pull it up, now we have the implication of another layer in there, or some airspace in here, which lightens the part up. It gives us some more openness in the form. I just fill that up a touch. Inflate that. We're going to turn that around into a form. Okay, that's going back. So we're going to just drop that back a little. And actually, I think we can literally just move that whole part back more. Right? And that gives us a little bit more room to go up. Oh, that's clay buildup, isn't it? Yep, wrong brush. That's okay. Okay, so, you know, what we're going to do is we're just going to close this up some. So when we redynamesh, these will connect. Because at this point, there's no point for that airspace. We're not going to take advantage of it. It's not visible, so there's no point in it being there. All right. Oh. Okay. Using the wrong brush, that clay buildup gets very aggressive. And you see how it doesn't allow us to give ourselves nice surfaces that we can follow. And saving. All right. Pull this up a little more. We'll get back to that. It's kind of getting our levels in place. That's a rollover. We'll just cut it back so this plane can be defined. Right. All right, so That will come up here. Fill that in. Here, let's make its transition into that. We'll come up with some kind of transition for those guys. Come up. That'll be a thing. This. You can see I'm just trying to define my visual layers here, right? I want that to be sitting in front of this. So this appears to be coming from behind, right? Because the more really nice transitional steps you have in a piece, the light reads far better. Especially when you have convex and concave curves acting against one another. Because they really do dynamic things with light. Alright. We're going to have another layer change in here, I think. Let's build that up. So it's really off that surface. And then let's do the same thing here, where we're changing this. After this, we're going to kick this up a little more, just so we can be a little more aggressive with that build-up. Right. Plane change, we'll drop it back down. All right. Just remember, like, over, under, over, under, over, under works really well with light because those levels reflect very differently. And so you can get some really nice dramatic surface follow through by having layer transitions. It adds a visual complexity and it points. It allows the light, as the light reflection follows along these surfaces, they sort of almost act like little neon signs pointing to where you want your eye to travel. So now you can see that pulled over when I did the trim front. I had that hidden, but I didn't have back face masking on. So it pulled that stuff back, but simple to get rid of, no drama. All right. So you can see we're slowly kind of working on coming into these forms. Get that back. All right, make in there. It's a little straight. Let's see if we can squeak that back up there without losing that. I just want that to have a little bit more curve. Let's pull that up a little more. See, we want that to look like it's coming out of that a wee bit more, so it's not just so straight. That's okay for now. This is going to have to come out here a little more. right. Well, that's kind of tricky. Uh, like, this is how I would approach doing something for my line, or something. And normally when I'm doing line pricing, I'm not really adding hours. Um, I'm just trying to come up with a good uh, sense of line, I guess. The pieces have to be consistent, but tell a story, and da 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 da. And normally, I just at that point decide what. Um, I'm not really trying to price at that point. I'm just trying to come up with a system of form that works throughout a series of pieces. And I have a hard time pricing in if it's my work. I have a very hard time pricing my time into things because I don't work necessarily efficiently, um, in the sense of I'm trying to make the best of my time. I'm usually trying to get the best of my forms. So it's I don't usually work my hourly rate into pieces that I'm designing for myself, um, because I consider it sweat equity to the line in some ways, where I would far rather spend, you know, 2 weeks on a single piece. If that piece is fantastic when it's done, great. Or I might hit it and it takes 2 hours and that's great too. So no, in a case like this, I really don't have um, a price factor for when I'm working. Uh, Freelance, I have very clear pricing, and then I work a little bit more efficiently in the sense of I'm paying attention to the hours. I'm not going to spend more than X amount of time on it. But normally, when I'm doing freelance work, they're very concrete designs up front, because usually freelance work is you're renting my skill, not necessarily my designs, if that makes sense. So, um, you know, for my work, I tend to have a much more, or when I'm working for myself, I tend to have a much more free process of seeing what my subconscious has to offer than going through and making real conscientious decisions to begin with, because they're often just some really magic, wonderful little moments that I would never have thought of. They are things that are in my hand or in my head. There's a vocabulary that I have. It's another reason, like, a lot of jewelers will ask me, "Oh, do you know this jeweler? You know that jeweler?" I tend not to look at other jewelers' work. I'll look at like historic pieces every once in a while, or I'll always go back and look at Lalique anytime I feel bummed, because I mean, dude's just as good as it gets. Um, but I tend not to look at other jewelers' work because my work process is a lot of free form or free thought, where I don't really have a plan. I just go in and look at my forms. And if you look at something and you see someone's work and they've done this brilliant thing, you know, chances are that's going to stick in your head some. And you may not conscientiously go, "Oh, I'm copying that person," but you very well may wind up bringing those forms into your work. And there's a big difference between copying and knocking off and being inspired. Like, I'm inspired by Lalique, and in turn I use, and I'm more inspired by Louis Sullivan, and some of those Art Nouveau architects I'm really inspired by. And that's sort of where this came from, like taking that architectural inspiration, and we're by no means copying that column, right? But I really like some of the forms and how it played with it, so we So you see I could go all the way back down and use move topological, which allowed me to move some of that without dragging things around. This is another reason I like to have the different resolutions so I can hop back and forth between them and get the full usage out of my mesh. But let's say, I'm designing this for myself. In a line, I'm usually trying to hit, there's a concept of who I'm selling the pieces to, and in turn, there's a concept of what price point I want to be sitting at, right? And so if I know that this piece is going to cost me, let's say, $50 to make, do I want a 3 times markup? Do I want a 6 times markup? And a lot of jewelry companies do a 6 to 8 times markup. So, if I know that I want to sell something for, $300 and you're trying to get a 6 times markup, well, now that gives you an idea of how much you need to get the part made for. But I'm not going to tally in my work hours into that process because it's for me, and that's a very bad habit to be in, honestly, guys. But I like to do this. I find, in the sense of, I like to go in without direction and see what the parts give me, and in turn, like I said, that's not really an efficient way of working if you're tallying your hours. So I've just gotten into the habit of just not tallying my hours for a piece if it's going into my line. But once again, if it's for someone, I usually have an idea of the concept. And so I work more efficiently. And then, you have a very concrete concept of what amount of time and energy you can put into something depending on their budget. Did that answer that question? Yeah, Lilique Renee. He's my hero. Him and Louis Sullivan. It's funny, everyone's like, oh, you were so inspired by Giger. And don't get me wrong, I was. But long before Giger, I was introduced to Hector Guillemot. Hector Guillemot is another, but Louis Sullivan, when I was young, I remember being in Chicago and just being awestruck by his buildings. And I made them buy me a book on Sullivan. And Sullivan was really the anchor for a lot of my aesthetic when I was really young. And then, like I said, Star Wars came out, and it was like, oh, this is really cool, but I really couldn't stomach Luke. I thought he was a whiny turd. And so, of course, I like Darth Vader. But next year, Alien came out, and I was like, holy cow, this is what it's all about. So I was far more an Alien kid than don't get me wrong, I had all my Star Wars toys, and I was into Star Wars, but Alien was really where it was at for me. And if you know anything about Louis Sullivan and Hector Guillemot, you can see where Giger is a very obvious step in the intellectual. It's not an intellectual leap to jump from them to him. And I was always sort of a monster kid, so I was drawing all this weird Art Nouveau-y bony stuff, and then Alien hit the market. My mom actually went out and got me, I remember it was in Omni magazine first, and then since Guccione owned Omni as well as Penthouse, they came out with the more adult stuff in Penthouse, and my mom bought me the Penthouse. I was like, look, you're not insane. This guy's insane just like you. And I was like, yeah. So I was headed down that track before I met Giger. But yeah, Giger definitely reinforced a lot in me. All right, so You can see now we're just coming in and trying to solidify some of these forms. And I would say if you guys are even doing props and stuff for video games and things like that, some of these theories still hold true for everything, and that is, it's a lot better, you know, you'll get into some of these organic forms and shapes, and, you know, you'll see that a lot of times you just wind up with something that intersects like this, you know, where you have this form just kind of coming into this form. And there you go, that's that. It'll read 1,000 times better if that form is actually sitting behind that form. And let's take twist, dynamic. You get something like this where there's airspace between these, one's on top of the other. And then even from back here, you get really nice, clean, concise separation of light travel on that surface, right? And so it's a really important thing, I think. And I still think that a lot of people who are even great at this stuff kind of neglect it, and it would make the pieces read 1,000 times better at the end of the day. It's just kind of remembering to do it. Because even if it's not coming out of the machine, it's still sculpting in light, you know. So okay, we're getting there. Let's close that up a bit. I was just talking today to a guy trying to get some raw emeralds. I love raw stones. They're just so exciting. I think that because, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I say I'm not a diamond fan because, well, I think they're incredibly overrated stones. But a perfect diamond is something to see. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And I love diamonds that fluoresce. I know everyone thinks that's a negative, but I mean, come on. I'm a child of the rave culture. Let's face it. Anything that shines under a black light's cool in my book, you know? I used to have black light posters. Why wouldn't I want black light jewelry? I mean, come on. That's just kind of cool. But I tend to like colored stones a little bit better. They're a little bit more exciting. And once again, I really find that if you are kind of breaking up your surfaces where you have something traveling behind and under, you can create these artificial, well, not necessarily artificial, but these senses of tension on your surfaces. And I always like to think of curves as like rubber bands between posts, or, you know, maybe like a water balloon that you're swinging around, where you're getting the weight distribution between the forms. Yeah, I think that you definitely go take a closer look. It's exciting. All right, so you can see I'm still fairly rough on all these surfaces, but we're starting to make some pretty concrete decisions about what's going on around here. And now let's look at the back. All right. I also find that if you stroke across things, you fill it up a little better than if you're going just straight down it, because often if you're just going on the surface back and forth, you're retaining the same dips, dents, and dings, where if you're stroking across, you're filling up stuff. You know, you can see I'll just kind of roll with it, and then it's simple enough to come back with like flatten or escape. Oh, dynamic. And, you know, get that surface to where you want it to be. But you can work out a lot of the dings and dips by going at it crosswise. Yeah, I definitely see why people use music. I don't know, does everyone talk all the way through their pieces, or I need to watch more? Here, we'll do this. Give a straight line to the side. Alright. That goes that. Keeps that air. Alright, that's pretty good for the back for now. Alright, so now we have to decide, are we basically done with our rough end of form? Because we will re-dynamesh this one more time, and then we'll start going in and doing finesse and start defining some surfaces and the such. Let's move all that out a little so that hole is relatively the right size. All right. Here, let's do this real quick. We're gonna make this an earring, so I want something. I'll need a pivot. We'll drag this up. Let's give it a nice return. That's an okay shape. Almost like a spade, and then snake hook. Before I snake hook, I'm going to duplicate. Go snake hook. Thin it out, just move it around a bit. All right, now why I decided to do that was because we are now going to re-dynamesh this. I've duplicated dynamesh. Nope. Where's my water bottle? We went lower the last time, didn't we? What is this at? Lower, 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 lower. Oh no, okay, close enough. High res. Go back to this guy. That's fine, let's divide, divide. Let's reproject here. So we're just getting our mesh back to where it was. And I'll deal with the rest of the stuff when we separate it out. So now let's look, see what we have. Oh, let's go here. Do we really need any more projected geometry than that? You can see how we get a little mess here. I'm not worried about that. Nope, that roughly has all the geometry we needed from the last one, so let's divide up. All right, and now here we go. Lower. Get rid of some of this noise. All right. Go back up to our higher res. I think we're okay with where everybody is. And so now I'm really going to come in and start defining my forms. All right. Turn that down a little. And a lot of this is really just depending on how these forms feel as I'm stroking them in. And we'll start making some final decisions on how we are laying in these surfaces. And once again, you can still see how, as I stroke things in, I'm still using lines so I can really see what my surfaces are doing. Right? Not super smooth. Right. And there's no real specific reason why we started any place. This just seemed like a good place to start. And now you can see that we had decided in some ways on the flavor of these surfaces by where we were putting our lines. And now we just need to come back in and really define how these things work. Now you'll see, this is once again sort of what I mean by layers, right? Instead of just drawing a line here, I really want to separate them into stepped layers. Because that's going to allow me, it's going to allow us to, like as we come back here, you know, you can see that the light reflects differently on that front edge than the lower edge. Where if we just put a line in this, dynamic ding dong, if we just put a line in this, and let's get back here, you can see really it's just traveling along that line. It's not changing edges. Where this here, You can see those reflect light at different points, which makes it much more dynamic from a distance. It gives you flashes. Yeah. Hello, how are we doing today? Oop, what'd I do? Oh, I redynameshed it. That is the one thing I think's a little weird, is that... Oops, wrong brush. How are you doing tonight, CZ? Or this morning, or whatever it is? Yeah. Yeah. And let's give this a transition here. Right. And once again, constantly going through compound curves because they travel, I can't iterate it enough. How the light travels through these things become very dynamic. And it really is a big difference in a successful piece, because the model can look great, but if it's flat, it really becomes an uninteresting object at the end of the day. Right? Layers, 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 layers. Did I mention that you guys should be thinking of things in layers? So it's sculptural, not illustrative or illustrated or whatever. All right. Okay. We're going to do something here. Yeah. Let's trim dynamic. Knock this back and around. It just gives us once again, a nice step. Stop that. There we go. Just gives you visual interest. Just step down. We'll make this a nice big flat area. So as you get darker under that step, it turns and this will reflect kind of a nice big bright flash. All right. Okay. And now we just keep working our way up. I kayak, I camp, I run around, but really I don't spend a lot of time not sculpting, honestly. I'm myopic OCD, so my free time becomes very funny. What's the thing? I say this is a bit of a new experience for me, thinking about how light reflects to make objects more appealing. Yeah, well, what's funny is we recognize it in objects, but often we don't understand that's actually what is happening, you know. And once you start working in high reflective materials like silver and gold and stuff, you start to realize it. And then as I started to make objects that aren't jewelry, just like little toys and stuff like that, you realize that, oh, well, it's the same for everything. You just need to know that that's what's happening, and then you can kind of think about it, you know, try to make it something that you are conscientious of. Because, you know, once again, you know, let's say you're putting pockets on something. If you know, you do this and just cut around your pocket, well, now it just looks like, hello. You know, it just looks like this is just all the same surface. Where by, you know, you know, if you put a pocket on something and then you leave a little opening for it and then that comes back in, you know, now this becomes something that's sitting on a surface and you're like, oh, well, it's sitting on the surface. But how it reads is, you know, really a process of light reflection. So it's because you have a shadow where it's telling you, and that's why we can have, you know, visual optical illusions. And a lot of them are dealing with like gray tones and how things sit and this and that. And our brains are trained to recognize certain things. And so either you can, you know, try to pull those little mental tricks on it, or, and we are in some ways pulling little mental tricks on it, we're giving it what it expects to see. And we're also providing interesting surfaces for interesting surfaces for light to reflect off of. And so, you know, if you're looking at something and, you know, it's moving, and this is not a very reflective surface, but you can see the light travel around this. And, you know, if you're creating interesting jewelry pieces, you have to really pay attention to how that light flows on that surface. And then as it's going here, what's it seeing next, and how does the light travel, and how does your eye follow these surfaces? And it's a tricky way of thinking about things, but I find that it really does work on anything. I mean, it's much more obvious in jewelry because you have very bright reflective surfacing. But you know, on let's say I used to sculpt D&D or D&D figures and things for Citadel, and you know, like little orcs and stuff. And you know, if you just scratch lines into something as opposed to building layer upon layer upon layer and getting these complex surfaces, which create really nice deep shadows and big flat areas for light reflection, and then chattered surfaces so you're not paying attention to it. The theory works on that scale as well. Okay, I don't know ZBrush, but I would like to know if it's possible to bake texture and material by ZBrush directly on a UV map. You know what? I'm really not the person to ask that, because unfortunately, when you're going to printing or in jewelry or model making, you actually need the geometry, where baked textures aren't necessarily real geometry. So we can't really get away with baking textures when we're going into printing or model making and such, because, you know, at the end of the day, that winds up being fake geometry. And so we actually need the real depth. Now, I guess you can take the UV maps and convert them into depth maps and then have that, you know, become real geometry at some point in some format. Yeah, I'm a sculptor. I just put, you know, I just sculpted on. So I'm sorry. I wish I could help you on that one, but I don't use maps. I don't really know much about them. Sorry. But, even in sort of this stuff, it's easy to go, okay, well, oh, I want a design line here, and oh, I want a design line here. I just find, and that's once again why I use clay tubes, I just find it is so much quicker by just laying it on, and then I can lay another thing here. And you can see how I'm getting the exact same stuff by brushing on depth as opposed to drawing on the line. And sorry about that, Nia. Does this make sense? I mean, this concept of not drawing on lines, but building up layers around it so you're getting the linear detail you want, but it is actually depth information as opposed to a drawn-on form. I think it's a really important thing, and I think that you'll actually have better, more compelling models if you're thinking about it as, more as a dimensional object. Like I said, I'm a sculptor. I don't, I think it's real important for everyone to at least go out and take one sculpting class so you can really view real objects in real 3D. I think people get used to, you see what I mean? I wanted the linear detail there, but I didn't draw it on. I built the forms around it. And I just think that if you're actually taking a sculpting class, I think you'll find that it makes you view these two-dimensional objects that we're making a little bit more. I think you'll have a better understanding of what they actually are in 3 dimensions. That's what's really nice about printing is you just throw it on the printer, look at it, and you can see that, oh, well, my detail's not there. Oh, this came out really well, or that didn't. And through that exercise, you're going to start to find out, what really works. Now, I've printed a lot of models, and I've redone a lot of models. But, I came out of sculpting, and the first thing I had was a mill and matrix. It's before I even knew ZBrush existed. And having that mill was awesome because anytime I built a model, I would just have it milled out and I'd be able to hold it in 3 dimensions and really evaluate what worked and didn't work. Because if you're just creating things in the computer, if you ever plan for them to leave the computer, you're kind of creating in a void. Because until you really hold the part in your hand and you see what, because, none of this is real. I mean, this is not real reflective light. They're algorithms. And, one material is different than another and blah, 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 blah. Until you hold that thing in your hand and look at it and really start to wrap your head about what's showing up, what's not, why, then, I think you're going to probably always come up a little bit short. You can have great designs and still have mediocre figurines. There's a lot that goes into really making something a good sculpture as opposed to a good digital sculpture. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's true. All right. Okay, that's looking okay. Let's come up here. We're going to make this like a bony protuberance. Let's get a little bit more moving. a lot of the problems we had, so mesh management is a really important part of the jewelry design or object design to printing. And a lot of the problems that we had with meshes and stuff have really been solved pretty cleanly by ZBrush. It's like what we used to have to do to manage a mesh now, being able to use the Boolean tools is pretty fantastic. And yeah, for people who are starting now, you're also lucky. Man, like there was just stuff you couldn't do, and now most of those issues are resolved. It's pretty exciting. Okay. Yeah, let's kick that out a little from underneath. Make it a little bigger. So we have a slightly more interesting object there. Okay. All right. It's also great because I think it's impossible to pass. I say pass. Yeah, so yeah, it's funny shifting to digital sculpting after, decades of actual sculpting. And, in the industry, we sculpted very large objects for the most part. And it's funny, one of the things and why you'd always go see the movies you work on and what other people worked on was, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to sculpt it this way. Then you go and see with the lighting and everything how it worked. And, so-and-so's like, oh, well, we did it like this. And you go see it in the lighting and how it worked. And, when you start to see your objects on film as opposed to in person, it's primarily lighting and environment. How in Jurassic Park they can take, foam trees and a foam set and make it look like an outdoor environment. On Kauai, it's quite amazing what lighting and environmental effects can do, just like throwing fog in something or this, that. And so when you start to see your work in film, on the screen compared to what it was when you sculpted it, you're like, oh my God, it's amazing what lighting does for the pieces. And so, I think that's where it started to develop some of the hardcore issues of we are actually creating objects for light reflection, and if we really want to get into weirdness, it's all, what we actually see, are we seeing, blah, blah, blah. I could get into a bunch of yabbering about esoteric nonsense, but yeah, it's tricky. It's interesting to see what works and what doesn't and why, and then how you evaluate what was working and what didn't. All right. So you can see by making a large flat edge here and scooping edges off to the sides, you're making the design a little lighter, right? Because it looks like it's a thin line. See how it actually thins the part out because the bright line of reflection is thinner. than if it were just one big flat line. And by making these scooped surfaces as opposed to flat surfaces, it gives a far more dynamic exchange in the shadows and then how these reflect out of the shadow. Shoot. All right. Let's make this a little. We sort of have this machine finish here, so let's make this a flat surface. And that'll sort of sell that same architectural as opposed to organic feel. Right? Now, just punch all that up for now. All right. How are we doing on time? All right. Okay, and so. And we'll just start filling some of this in. Giving ourselves a really nice light step there as well. Right. Okay. Yeah, it's funny. It's quite hard to talk for hours straight. All right. Let's see. How do we want these swirls to behave? We'll keep them simple. So here we're picking what's the main reflective surface we want. Right? I want that to be a nice big flat reflective surface. And that. Okay. And see, even though this is a pretty fat, I mean, comparatively speaking, you know, this is a pretty broad object here on the end. We can keep it thin by having these two large flat lines. Two large flat lines. Shoot. And so now you can see that as we come back here, You see how that'll read thin once it starts, once we start getting into our metals. We also, like, you can come back in here, and I have this brush set up as the sub, make it a little smaller, and come in, and often I'll do something like this. So that becomes a scatter field. It won't reflect light very well. You know, it's throwing it off, so that really accents this line and this line. So, you know, by using texture to dull your surface, it's another way to control how it's reading. Nope, not clay buildup, clay tubes. Okay. And it's a little more architectural than super swervy, so all we have to do is come in and just flatten that. And now it'll read a little bit more architectural than organic, right? See? Does that make sense? And now, you're okay with that. Let's come to here. And we'll start defining some of this stuff. Keep it thin and fat. All right. Decide where our transitions are happening. All right, that's okay. Okay. Make sure you're not creating big wonky curves. Look at them from directions. Remember to rotate your model a lot, because you can start to see, like, if you have something really funky going on, you can identify it pretty quickly if you look at it from a different angle. Let's see. How involved do you get into the process of construction of a piece, or is your job done after you've created the design? Well, actually, I get pretty anal about the actual construction of the piece. I mean, one of the things I've gotten known for is my ability to retain surface detail through the fabrication process. And so, you know, like setting up quality control processes with the people who are fabricating your pieces is actually really important. Luckily, I have a really good relationship with a lot of the people who actually make my parts. And for a lot of them, you know, the ability to produce it is actually, like, Casting House uses my pieces when they go to trade shows to go, hey, look what we can do. So, yeah, I think that, you know, unfortunately, my stuff's really hard to produce. And we've been developing ways of doing it over the last, you know, number of years. But for the most part, I've had to be really on top of the fabrication facilities. Casting House in Chicago really stepped up, and I mean, they really did my work well, and, you know, took a lot of stress off that whole, oh my God, am I going to get crappy pieces this time? And so we use them a lot, and then we set up our own shops, and those are designed really to produce my work, and that became a much, when the shop is actually set up to produce the pieces, then a lot of those issues that you come up with when you're not using the best waxing machine, and you're not using a vacuum injection overpressure movement, a vacuum overpressure casting machine, and just some of that subtle stuff in the machinery. If you don't know what they're using, it becomes tricky. We're dealing with a company in Thailand right now for some of the body jewelry stuff, and I must say that they stepped up pretty well. I think there's a little bit of over polishing, but that's really, we rushed the first round of pieces through. So, at the end of the day, that's our fault, because we didn't even get to discuss the parts with the parts and the part creation with them. We didn't say, look, I just want the tops polished and blah, blah, blah. So often, if you have specific needs, it's going to take 1 or 2 rounds with the fabrication facility to tune the pieces, and then you have to set up quality control standards so you're not getting dud pieces. You're like, okay, I'll accept this through this, but if it's this, then that's on your back. And so I think that if your pieces are easy to fabricate, you can let a lot of that go, because these places, this is what they do for a living, But unfortunately, my stuff is such a pain in the butt to make. You have to be a little bit more involved if you really want, the quality standard not to go down quick. Like I said, the place in Thailand that we've been dealing with has been actually pretty awesome. And hopefully, once again, everything we've been doing is sort of rushed, or has been sort of rushed. So it'll be nice over the beginning of the new year to be able to go down to Thailand and go to the casting facility and talk to them and show them the parts, and really set up, a finishing process that they understand and I like. And, so it's, if you're going to do one-off pieces, that's one thing. But if you're going into fabrication with, hundreds of thousands of pieces, you better make sure that all that stuff's sorted out and set up QC standards. And it's an involved nightmare. Making jewelry isn't easy. It's like, you really need to make sure that these people, a certain casting house was not so sweet for me. We had to wire them to positively shoot the job details. Finally wrote my own job estimate and asked them to review the rebrand art. Yeah, it's interesting. I've had very, very good relations and luck with the people that I've worked with, because once again, I think that I established a personal rapport with them very quickly. And like I said, I wouldn't be a jeweler if it wasn't for Casting House, because everybody else told me no. They were like, that's uncastable, that's uncastable, that's uncastable. And I ran into Jason and from Casting House, and he looked at the stuff. It's like, oh, hell yeah, that's castable. Here, let's do it. And yeah, I've never gotten a bad part from him. But everyone experiences things in their own right, without a doubt. I can just attest to my experiences. Yeah, no problem. I enjoy doing these. I must admit, I really need to sit down and watch what some of the other people are doing, because I don't know how they're doing a lot in 2 hours. I really feel I don't know. I always feel like my God, I don't know if I'm actually getting anything done as worth seeing in 2 hours. And I've come to realize, like I said, I realized tonight why people play music because, yeah, being able to not talk for a few minutes and actually sculpt, because my poor brain, I don't multitask very well. So trying to come up with things to say while sculpting is tricky. All right, here we go. Because we sort of discussed why we have these things here. Now I'm just trying to get things into place and resolved. So I don't know necessarily what to say at this point. I will say one of the really nice things about being self-employed is I can listen to books on tape and watch documentaries all day. Had a good documentary day today. It's been interesting. All right. Okay. Let us bring something in there. Somehow that D, I hit the wrong thing. Oh, go away for right now. All right, or not, whatever. Okay. So you can sort of see we're creeping up on these surfaces. And it really, you'll see me kind of go back and forth on whether they're convex, concave. Explain what you do. Oh, great. I'm glad someone's getting something out of it. You ever had issues with your, you know what? I used it for 6 months, well, 7 months on the road. And the only problem I had was I almost got one of the hijack viruses. I luckily shut it down before it actually got through with the hijacking process. And off of a picture from, downloading a picture. And, but luckily I was paying attention enough that I got, it didn't actually fully get me, but it trashed my machine. I had to completely reinstall everything. It just ate it. It was pretty impressive. Boy, viruses are nasty buggers. But as far as the machine itself, I have not. I've had nothing but very good luck with it. Do you have one? Have you had a problem with it? I mean, or have you heard reports of people having problems with them? Because I'll tell you, mine's been a dream, The only, well, the screen's dramatically smaller than this Cintiq, but as far as processing power, the sunglasses I did were, it's a 33 million poly model, and it opened it and dealt with it fine. I just had to, I couldn't work on it in one swoop. I'd have to, do this and work on one little section. But it handles 7 to 9 million poly models without a problem. And, you get up into the 12 to 14 mil and you get a little lag. But no, honestly, I've been nothing but impressed with it. but I don't have anything else on it. I mean, I have Photoshop on it, and some like Mischief I have on it, and then I have Microsoft Word, so I can send invoices and stuff, or Microsoft Office. But it's pretty light. I don't have tons of stuff on the machine, so there's plenty of room. And then I dump all of my quick saves off onto another drive, so I don't get a big stockpile. So weeks ago, right out of the box, I worked for 20 minutes session or something. Then, ouch. Yeah, I liked my companion as well. The only problem is it was completely useless for me to sculpt on. It didn't have, just the difference in screen size is pretty dramatic. I'm sorry to hear you had a problem with the Mobile Studio. Normally, Wacom's really, really good about dealing with any issues. I had a problem where one of my little, like the screen burnt out, or one of the solenoids, or whatever the living jajibas it was, burned out of my Cintiq, and they said just put it in the box, send it back, and I mean they fixed it, sent it back to me. It wasn't even gone a week, and they completely paid for it. They had no, I've had nothing but incredibly good experiences with Wacom. I mean, I'm a real turd to companies that, if I pay something, I pay $5 for something, that's one thing. But if I'm spending, thousands of dollars on your product and then something happens to it and then, somehow it's always my fault, I get to be a real turd. So I'm not someone who is going to defend a company just because I like their name. I really do believe in customer service. If someone calls me and is like, oh, this ring cut my finger off, well, I'm going to accept responsibility for it. And I tend to really try to help. I had a woman who got pregnant, and she put on quite a bit of weight, and I had done their wedding rings, and she asked if she could get it spaced, and I was like, well, I don't really make rings that you can put spacers in, and she sent it back to me, and we actually found a way of dealing with it. And honestly, it took a lot of work to get it done, but this is her wedding ring, and I sold it to her, and I didn't charge her for it or any of that because it wasn't a huge issue for me to sort it out. And just the positive word of mouth of actually taking care of something and not causing grief to the client. I think that you'll find that if you think that the client, if you're really, there are people who are just out to get something free. They're like, oh, this came in and there's a scratch on it, I want 3 free things. That's a different thing. Those are people that I have no problems talking very poorly to. But, if people are really trying to, people who have brand loyalty, who really love the work, and, just something happened, I'll do everything in my power to help them get that sorted out. And that's one thing I'll say about Wacom is that I've had a couple problems with pieces over the years, and every single one of them was dealt with without an issue. And once again, I can only speak, for myself. I don't know if how they're rated or anything like that. I can just tell you my experiences with them. Yeah, I think they're a good company. In my opinion, they're a good company. And I've done some events with them, and they were always very generous and very pleasant. And, for the most part, the employees are interested in what you're doing, and, it's not just, oh, so, yeah, I hope that they do come through for you there. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing the, what is it, the 31 or 32 inch that they're coming out with. That just makes me giddy. All right, let's see. I'm a firm believer in as much screen as you can afford, get. Because I never have enough room to do everything I want. I have everything open all the time. It's one of the disadvantages of having a fast machine is that you get lazy about closing stuff, and I have like six programs open, and 13 web pages, and I pause for half a second. I'm like, what's going on? So that was the one thing switching to the Mobile Studio Pro was, you can't. I just don't have enough RAM to beat it down that much as I do my machine. It's been funny coming back to my machine after being on the road for so long. I'm like, oh my god, my screen's so big. Right on, right on. I'm getting there, right? Yeah, once again, see how we sort of, I think, making that a little more. It's a little sharper. This is a little flourishy for this. We started with a fairly flourishy thing, didn't we? All right. I wanted to get breaking this piece up, the dongle here, so we might call the design done here soon, or at least enough to look at some Boolean, some of the live Booleaning. Yeah, this got a little weird. When you lose sight. Here, let's see. All right, so we're going to make this a hinge. So just kind of decide where your hinge is going to be. All right. Let's, yeah. All right. So we're going to separate it there. Right. So this is where, let's append cube W, turn Y off. Oop. Have to select our box layer. Polycube. Let's turn this on so we can actually see what's going on here. We want 1, 2, and then we want 1. Yep, that'll do. There. Go Z modeler, slide, edge loop complete. And we're just gonna get ourselves this good W. Get it roughly into the right space. Slide it through. Get this down here. Move that up. There we go. Now another thing we can do. Well, here, let's just Z modeler. Just knock that down. Insert. Turn symmetry on. And oops, wow, what happened there? Oh, slide, not insert. Often you'll want to do this just so no matter what's going on above it, you can clear it and then go ahead and get both these surfaces and just pull it up so you have a clean clearance. Right. And now W control, let's make that, turn X off, cylinder, we want that, W, turn it sideways, that wasn't 90, excuse me, 90, make sure it's out, W, come on, make it there. All right, that's that. So now we come back to here, grab move, and let's just make sure. That's not what we needed. I felt it stick. Come on. Do you have a deal with ring size variations and stock pieces reduce full-time cost? Do you have to deal with ring size variation? Yeah, you do, of course. I do a lot of custom. That's tragic. I do a lot of custom. Nope. I do a lot of custom work, but yeah, you definitely have to deal with ring sizing. That's why when a lot of people want to start like at-home companies and they're doing it with rings, it becomes a problem because, well, namely, sizing tons of rings is a real nightmare. Once again, like for the skull rings and stuff, I literally just sized them. You know, I just scale them up to the mandrel size of the rings. I did full sizes, and normally how I built my pieces, I could grind out the ring to get to the half sizes. So a size 12 would be a 12 and a 12 and a half. Anything below like 6, I tended to redesign, like the sugar skull and things like that. I tended to redesign the part. I would have to go back in and change the designs on things that are really tiny because, you know, let's face it, you just can't get that much into it. But now with ZBrush Summit, everybody going? Now with some of our production techniques, we can really get some of the detail to retain even in its smallest order. Did that answer your question? Where'd you go? Recover document. Right? No. CPR. Let's see if it'll get us back to where we were. All right. There it is. Ta-da! So now, let's see if we can do this without a blow. No, that's move. Why? Move. All my dynamics are on. So you can see we want to, here, let's lower the res. Maybe that's why it was crying about it. You know, you obviously want to readjust your meter around your Boolean. All right. Come back out here and we'll just push that so it's where we want it. All right. High res. High res. All right. So now you can see we're cutting that. So we come over here. Let's split this to parts. And we will make that our start. We'll make this a cutter. We will make that a cutter. Let's look at it. And you can see that that gives you your pen. And you will need to do a different cut because this is cutting through your pen. See? But if you change the order, is that doing it for us? No. That's odd. One of those should change that. Well, that's okay. And make Boolean mesh. And let's see what it has to say. Okay. So let's hope this goes through without any major chaos. Sorry, any questions or anything while we're sitting here waiting for this to think? See, music is important. I used to do some hand fabrication, and I really, I want to try to get into some chasing. There was one up before you. Oh, like do you any smithing? Oh, that I see. That was the one. I really want to do some experimenting with chasing and repousse. Split to similar, well, split to parts. Let's separate all those bad boys. And I used to just do a lot of just hand fabricating and silver and soldering. Is the pen? Oh, no, not just yet. Right now, if you'll notice, we have all these different parts here. Let's turn on transparency so we can look at it, right? Normally, you can also cut a bigger hole, you know, because at the end of the day, this is the hole. These are the pens, right? Here, let's hide this. Let's just look at our pens. In something like this, I actually would do this here. Let's hide that. merge down, merge down. Where are you? Frame. Really? Okay. You. And I would shrink this just a touch. Right. Probably even shrink it just a little bit more. And make sure it's centered. All right. Close enough. And then Dynamesh it so it's all one thing. And hold on. I'm like, I don't know how to drop my part now. Brain freeze. Oh, hold on. Do something in this vein. Now that's your pen, right? And you can either, you know, sort of take this, W, center it, and get this to where it's almost the same size. And, you know, now you can, and I would obviously hide this again. No, go away. Take this, smooth this edge down, right? And then like SK trim or something, and just get this to be smaller than that side. And now this will act as a wedge pin, right? You slide it in, this is wide enough, you just tap this in, and now that's pinching in, and you can fill this in with solder. Or you leave them loose, you just hold it and tap it, and you can solder that in and or weld it in, right? But see, now if you enlarge that side, you know, you have a little bit of slop on this side, you just take this in, hammer it in until it gets in. Now you have a pressure fit pen. And, you know, you might want to play with it and see, you know, you might want to enlarge the side just a touch, but just make the other side the exact size or just a touch bigger and just tap that in. And now you sort of have a free floating, and that's a quick way to get a hinge in there. Now, once again, this is square. So of course you would have to come back to this and hide these guys for a second. No. Come back to this. Yeah. And at this point, you know, you would obviously have to come in here and knock this edge off. Oop. You'd have to redynamesh it because I did that with something that had one plane on it, so you can see that it. All right, now it's redynamesh. Come back out to this. You know, just knock this around. Planar. Let's do trim front. Oops. Shoot. Shoot. Nope. Shoot. There we go. And then trim dynamics good to knock these lips off. Shoot. Shoot. You know, you can spend more time and actually do a little bit more concise edging or hinging. You know, you just need to see where your hinge point is and then make sure that it clears, right? Show that. Let's just go to this. W. All right, let's get that right about that size here. No, it's this part. W. right? And from here, you can rotate and see if what's hitting or not. I took a lot off that, but that's something to consider, right? You want to give it enough room to move, and boom, boom, yeah, right? Does that make sense? Okay, let's see. I love chasing. Yep, it's awesome sauce. I say thank you. Do you simulate the rotation or just eyeball it? Well, I mean, if it's very tight, I will come in here. I will then center on the actual pivot, the hinge. I'll come in with a mark and, well, this has no geometry. Yeah. Come on, you. Dynamesh 128. What are we at? Okay. That should be better, right? Nope. All right, divide it. Divide it. All right, that's enough. W. And normally I'll do this one line at a time. Switch to this. Oh man, rotate it. But I'll use this line as a guide. Right, and then you can do the same thing here. Get your line, use line as a guide. And, well, that's obviously not the right place here. Let's go W. Zoom in. Get it right there. Just like that. You can get there. All right. So now that is center on that part. So now when you come to this guy, you go to W. Nope, that's the wrong part. We want this one. And, it was over here. So I'll just come in, grab this, line it up to where the center of my pivot is. And now you have a more accurate view of what your pivot's doing and what you could get away with, right? Oh yeah, the glasses would have been a nightmare to chase. You need a little itty bit, tika. So that's how I check my tolerances. Is I'll normally mark the center of my pivot, and then that way when you're out here, and this is another great thing about the gizmo is like you can get in here and you can really see what's going to hit, what's not going to hit, what's going to hit. Here, let's go back to this point, right? And yeah, W. Nope. Yeah, okay. And we'll set this up. Nope. Grab this, come to here, and you can see if anything's hitting, so it's lifting off from there, so that's fine. But you can see as you come back here, that acts like a stop. So you can decide exactly what you need. You can trim it a little more, slide it, trim it, slide it, trim it, slide it. Or you can go like this and just give yourself a line. And now just center it, hide this part. And now you can see where your line is, right? So that's sort of where that curve is going to go to. There's trim dynamic. Well, here, let's trim front. That's our edge line, so we'll just go a touch past it. And then trim dynamic. Now you can be obviously very accurate with this in the sense of you can take this pen, duplicate. We drew that line on this, right? And just go W. And now, that's the angle of the curve as it hits that line, right? So here, if we come back to this, trim dynamic. No, wrong one. Trim dynamic. Now that, hide that. Let's see that. Right. And now, W. Is it still in the same place? Yep. And now you can see where it hits or not, right? Right. So we needed to take a touch more off that. That wasn't quite on axis. Oh, I see. I went to this, not this. You would make that hit the edge of this, and that gives us the angle. I went off that line drawn. Does that make sense? I see there's material shrinkage you have to take into consideration when you're casting apart in regard to... Well, see, that's tricky. Because if this is thin and this is really thick, how these shrink, like different shapes shrink differently. So really what you're going to wind up doing is doing one, seeing how it looks, and then going at it and changing it. There's no real science. Well, I say that. I'm sure there's some wing-dingy mathematician who can figure this stuff out. But like with us, we have about a 3% shrinkage. And so we just shrink everything 3%. And you'll find out pretty quick, is this gap big enough? And then you'll just be consistent with, okay, I need a millimeter gap. Oh, I need a 3 millimeter gap. Oh, I need a blah, blah, blah. But that's why it's so funny. You can't just take one, you can't just do a piece and then, think because your pen works here and, everything sort of works that it's going to work as a part. The problem with development is that it's not easy. It takes a long time. And let me tell you, the second you think you know what's going on, you're going to be really disappointed. Because, different materials shrink differently. Fat things shrink differently compared to thin things. And, it's like what shrinks evenly, what doesn't, So that's such a, there's no real answer for that other than, you do it once, you see where it is, you change the model, you see what happens. And I know when you're trying to do things at home, that becomes a real pain in the nuts. But there's no solid answer to figure it out. I know that, like I said, the way we're doing things, we're getting real consistently about 3% change. I'll do everything. I'll get it in the right place. I'll then tune the part to my percentage changes. Okay. That's ta-da. We have a dangly earring, I think. What time is it? Yeah. It's almost 11. All right. So, yeah. Are there any questions? What's so nice is all of the drama that you used to have to go through to pre-process parts for printing really are solved now in one easy step. You go to Decimation Master. Yeah, pre-process. Let's just pre-process current. Pre-process current. You can pre-process all, and then you can do it all in one shot, but we'll just don't necessarily want to wait for it. And honestly, what you probably want is to decimate, for the most part, decimating pieces. There are some pieces that I've needed a million polygons in. Like if you remember the thing I used on the ZBrush Summit, there was this woman who had a Tengu hat on, and that head was 50 million polys, and I needed about a million polys to retain any of the detail in it. It was stupid. It was ridiculously detailed, but that was sort of the point. No, it's still thinking. But for the most part, most of your printers, well, they can handle much bigger pieces than they used to be able to handle. Like I said, my God, you're coming into it now. You're all living in heaven compared to the hell that I had to go through when I started all this. With those added later. How about gemstones? Have you ever made something with those added later? Yeah, you just measure it, and once again, just make sure that it's the right size. And then with the shrinkage, it'll come down. Oh, is that what you mean? I can do gemstones next week if you want. I'm going to have to get my head around what we can accomplish in a few hours. Oh yeah. No, I mean all of these are up at Pixelogic Live. I don't. I'm not sure if I link them through my site. That's something I haven't talked to them about yet. I have to figure out. Like I said, I just started this. I've only done it a couple times, so I'm not exactly sure the process in which it is, but I know for a fact that they're on the Pixelogic site and also the Pixelogic YouTube site. I think that they go up there as well. Reordering. Oh, this is emailing Polly shouldn't take this long. So yeah, all of the streams wind up online. Do you have a stone setter you go to? Yeah, I have a couple stone setters I go to. Yeah, we can do that. This is decimating. I can't do anything. It's thinking at the moment. Yeah, ZBrush is, I mean, as a sculptor, I really don't see any, ZBrush is just absolutely the way to go. It's magnificent. It's just, I tried to work with Maya for a while and I just wanted to pull my hair out. Where here, as you saw, this was done with, 2 brushes. You just need to sculpt, and that's what makes ZBrush so fantastic. So I think here, let's just decimate this real quick. 200,000, enter 200, decimate current. And you can see this is now 200,000 polys. It was at almost 9 million. You can see how it breaks it up. It keeps our detail. But look, for the most part, we've lost absolutely no surface fidelity. So you can see that, 200,000 polys is a perfectly legitimate way of going through. I need to catch up on your previously. My first time here. I love that piece. This makes it. Yay, sugar skulls. Okay, so, and then really, all you do is export as STL, 3D Print Hub, update size ratio, except what's really nice is that it used to be where this would give you the entire scene size. Now it'll give you the separate subtool size. That's cool. One thing that will screw you up, though, is you go, okay, I've selected this. It is calibrated to this part. And then let's say I'm looking through something and I go here, and I have not changed this update size ratio. It is going to look at this part at this size ratio. And you wind up with really weird exports that way. So make sure that before you export all your pieces, look at what tool is active and just re-update your size ratio. See how it's different? Okay, boop. So now everything's calibrated to that part. And then you just go export to STL. You choose its naming convention, and now everything's to scale. And the scales are pretty convincing. All right, hold on. Let's do this. I don't have my here. We'll do a cap. I don't have. I have like 20 terabytes of drives right now that I'm going through and trying to get organized before I shuffle off to Spain. And man, I'm all my drives are chaos right now, so I can't find anything. But let's do this real quick. Append sphere W. Damn. Flatten. All right. So you have a cab, right? W. No, I went at 180, didn't I? Oh. You know, if you're doing a cab, so the easiest way to do this is duplicate, make a cylinder, same size. How awesome is that? Just give it some geometry, W, get it down to the same size. Come in here and just sink it in a little. That start. Let's bring this down just so we don't get any weirdness. Make that negative. So now that's your seat, right? And for a cab, chances are all you're going to need to do is, oh, this has been decimated, sorry. All right. You just have to give it a ridge of meat that you can catch and fold over your part. You can do the same with, I don't have any stones on me right now, or I'd show you this with the stone setting. But it's all basically the same. Next week, or not next week, week after, I'll show you how to do stone setting. Do you have a cloud service like Dropbox Sync where you store some of your projects, or do you do everything local? Oh no, I put everything on external drives and then also mostly up on Dropbox. It's hard to sync. I have literally like 10 terabytes of files. I'm ridiculous that way. Yeah, is it? Sorry, the lime green I can barely read. Is Charlie? No, Nozumi. I will. No, who asked me about stone setting? Am I hallucinating here? Yeah. Okay. Ay, ay, ay. So my next one, week after next, I will get some of my various pieces, and then we will talk about how to set stones into things in the next stream. Sorry about that. I'm not quite prepared for that. I don't have stones. I don't have anything in it. But you can see how you can start to use the others as cutters. You can also use the stone you're using as a cutter. We'll go through all that. Next week after next will be stone setting stuff. Okay, good. So Nezumi, have you seen the plugin Lazy Nezumi? It's awesome, guys. Everybody should go get it. I'll show you that as well. See? Lazy Nezumi. All right. Any last questions before I wrap this up? Yeah, it's awesome. And it is a completely rad plugin. Um, all right, guys. So, and gals, yeah, we'll do stone setting next stream. All right, guys. I appreciate you being here, and you know, I'll try to tune my timing a little better. I'm still working on this streaming thing. I haven't quite mastered it, but we're getting there. I think this is a little bit better than the last time. Um, okay. Thanks a million. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Or yeah, every other week, 2 weeks. Yeah. Okay. Have a great evening, guys. Let's see. Where's my little thingy bob? There it is. All right. Good night, guys.